Hello, you're listening to 101 Part-Time Jobs with me, Giles Bidder, where I speak to artists and musicians about their survival, how they've been able to prioritise the very thing that we know them for. On this episode, Teenage Sequence, aka Dewan-Dean Soomary. Teenage Sequence has its first 2 tracks out, All This Art and The City Is Hungover. They're both brilliant. If you know of Devon's old bands, Bleach Blood and The King Blues, you'll know it's a departure from his usual sound into something more electronica and synthy. Thank you so much for listening to 101 Part-Time Jobs. This will be the last episode of 2021. Fingers crossed we'll have a lot more guests in 2022. East London's Signature Brew have been brewing beers with bands since 2011. They've made beers with Mastodon, Idols, Sports Team, Hot Chip, and so many more. They're the official beer of 101 Part-Time Jobs, which means that if you go to their website, signaturebrew.co.uk, with the voucher code 101podcast, all capitals, you can get 10% off your order there. Seity Socks in Brighton have a new range of seriously soft socks made from organic cotton in Europe and delivered to you in sustainable packaging. You can get 15% off your order on seitysocks.com. That's SEITY with the voucher code 101SOCKS, all capitals. 10% of all profits go to gig buddies who enable people with learning difficulties to fully enjoy their communities through attending live music events. It's all our responsibilities to be inclusive to everyone to our events and concerts, and gig buddies provide a brilliant way to do that. This is Teenage Sequence, Dewan-Dean Soomary on 101 Part-Time Jobs. We start off from when we first met in a pub in High Wycombe, where his band at the time left a wad of cash in a bin liner, and then some people we knew took it back to them at their gig in London the next week. Cheers for listening. Go well. Cheers!
It drinks in spite of itself.
He must have been one of the first people I might have thought, you know, I put on a pedestal in a way that I was just like, you're fucking amazing. You're playing a pub down in High Wycombe. You know, like, where do these people come from?
I remember that pub in High Wycombe. Didn't we? I mean, I think that was the show where like we like left all of our money at the show, and
That's
a bunch of kids were like, yeah, we found this bag, because we get like back then we kept on it was like in a bag or something, and a bunch of kids who I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but I'm sure you were friends with them. You may well have been in a band with them, right?
Yeah, I think I knew of them. They're sort of in our circle, and it was the thing like, oh yeah, the band left all this money, and we're going to go. Yeah, go up to London and give it back.
Yeah, exactly. They seem to have left a bag of money, and we're gonna go to the 12 bar, and because we were playing the 12 bar, and they came down to it, and it was just like, yeah,
someone professionals brought up very well.
yeah. I mean, I can assure you, if that was a London show, right, like that bag of money would be long gone.
Those kinds of small town scenes are just so vital to what we're doing. If anyone's listening to this and thinking, oh, there's a place in my town that I might be able to put on shows, and there's a few bands I think of to get in touch with, whoever you are, you should totally do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and it largely doesn't matter what the genre of music is, but like those grassroots small town shows are ultra important. And, you know, keep an eye out for your local bands and put them on. One of my main takeaways from like punk rock, this is where I, and you know, I'll go out on a limb here and say yourself as well, Giles, come from, is that without those small scenes doing something and providing a platform for like a London-based band, or like if you want a bigger city band to come and play and experience, like, you chop off new bands at the legs there. Without that, it doesn't exist. And, you know, also on that note, it's a symbiotic relationship, right? So anyone listening to this who is in like a big city band, you know, like your Londons and Manchesters and whatnot, go and play those small towns, because they're some of the best shows you will ever play. And people, you know, it's like you make the effort, right? if you make the effort to turn up and go and play a garage in like Aberystwyth, which I've done, people remember that and people care about that, and they appreciate that you've come to their town. You've not asked them to come to like the big city near them. It goes a real long way.
Totally. And even, the premise of this podcast is that conversation of survival, of making it happen, being able to make it a sustainable thing, right? And selling records and selling merch and making those 80 quids when you need it. That's such a big part of being an artist or being a musician or doing whatever you're doing on tour. And those are those shows where that stuff happens there.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the shows that like they transcend money. And like I say that and what I mean by that is there are certain established promoters and venues and spaces that it's criminal how little they pay the bands on stage, right? And we all know that. And I'm not laying the blame at any one single person or persons.
It's everyone, really. It's like a blanket.
It's the entire industry. But but when you have these shows where it's like, yeah, you're going to get £80 to do this, and you're going to have like the best night of your life, and you're going to play one of the best shows you've ever played because everybody in the room is so amped up for your performance and for you to be there with them, and they're ultra grateful that you've bothered to come to their small town, right? And I say this, I have a very London centric view on things because I am from and born and raised in London, right? And those shows, as I said, they just transcend the money, they transcend the pay, and you will be able to survive and it won't cost you anything. Ideally it's not going to cost you anything and you're not going to make any money, but the experience that you get from doing that, you can't pay for that.
Sustainable in a psychological sense, right? You're like, this is it. This is it. This is the culture. This is the subculture.
Yeah, absolutely.
How much do you want to talk about the King Blues? Because I'm totally happy to not. I'm totally happy to. We can leave it a kind of an ambiguous entity.
It's a thing that I did, and I don't hide it. I was a part of it for an awful amount of time. It's not something that I wish to dwell on too much, but given the nature of this of the podcast, I mean, it's just kind of part of my story, right? So we can chat about it.
One of the things that we talked about, we went for a coffee the other week, was like that sort of big house that you lived in, and I can imagine that's largely positive memories of being together and having this new thing. And by the time I found out about the band, you'd made that album, and the first album with Pete Miles, who I think I knew from Howard's Alias and that kind of burgeoning ska punk scene that was sort of kind of 5 years ahead of my time, I suppose. But it was like all those bands were touring 40 dates in the UK. It's like that, like, talk about sustainability though in those small towns. Those are the bands that were doing it. So I wondered, did you go into that route where it was like, okay, this is what we do now, we're just going to go on tour, even though we don't really sound like those bands? We're definitely in the culture, in the politics, in the socio fabric of that vibe, if I could use the V word. What was your story getting into that and kind of getting onto that, being pushed into that?
It was like, I was quite young. I was the youngest member of the band, right? And in our crew, I was one of the younger people. And essentially, it was kind of this, I didn't really know much about how the industry worked, or like on a grassroots level, or even on a larger level than that. I learned that as we did it. But the one thing you kind of know is like, it's that sort of classic, here's 3 chords, go write a song, go play that song to people. So from my perspective, that's what we did. And yeah, there's this, there is this like tried and tested path in DIY. And there are people and going back to what we say, there are these scenes that exist, and you reach out to them and you say, hey, we're a band and this is what we sound like. And can we come and do a show? And that was it. And then you just, you stitch it all together. And again, like, I wasn't responsible for doing that bit. I didn't know how, arguably, I still don't know how to ask a promoter for a show. I don't know what you're meant to do there. But it was essentially like there's this path, right? And the bands that I like have all gone down that path. So that's what we're going to go and do. And that's what we did. And we started playing shows. And again, I think for the King Blues thing, a lot of back in the Under the Fog era of the band, a lot of what made that band work was the fact that we did play a hell of a lot of shows, and we often played way outside our comfort zone, whether that be like a strictly like hip hop night or a strictly acoustic night.
So you did that stuff as well as the because the Filaments massively come to mind, and playing outside the good mixer in Camden. I saw that on MySpace photos. I was too young to go, but I didn't know you played hip hop nights as well.
Yeah. I mean, again, I can't claim to be the one who arranged any of that. That wasn't me, but it was a large thing that helped that band, in my opinion, and myself, was the ability and the want to play outside of our comfort zones. But being the style of music we played, particularly again in that first album, very ska orientated record.
So accessible, wasn't it?
Well, isn't it? I mean, it allowed us to be to kind of fit in a lot of different places, and it was in retrospect, it's quite intriguing to me that it made sense, albeit like somewhat, at the time there was probably some smirks on people's faces when you get 2, 3, or 4, depending on the lineup, guys turn up with like 2 acoustic guitars and a ukulele plugged into a 5150 in a scout hut, and we're playing with like Among the Missing and all of those hardcore bands. So that I am actually referencing a particular show there as well, and yet it still translated. And then it could also translate into like a strictly MC hip hop night. And I think the thing that a lot of those audiences had was the respect to like that we got up and did that thing and went out of our comfort zone, and that gave us that gave us kind of time. But the band could fit into those spaces.
That freedom is really empowering, and we got that as fans.
Yeah, I mean, I think it translated really, really well.
Did you take it seriously quite quickly? Was it gang mentality? It certainly sort of seems like that from the outside.
Yeah, it was a huge gang mentality, which at the time was very exciting and very, like the world felt like we could, it felt to me like we could conquer it, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, we were real serious about it. Really serious. We took it absolutely seriously. In retrospect, that kind of approach is one that I wouldn't do again. It takes its toll, right? And there's
it's exhausting, right?
Well, it's exhausting, but it also brings out the real worst in a lot in people in general. Like I, for my own, for me personally, I wouldn't want to do that because it just, the level of sacrifice I don't think needs to exist anymore. It kind of fits into this like tortured artist kind of narrative, right? And the quicker the music industry breaks away from this and people realize that, to be in a band, you don't have to sacrifice your entire well-being and mental health and the health of the other people. It turned real toxic real quickly, and in retrospect, a lot of those seeds were planted very early on.
Were you working all the way through?
No, so I haven't had many serious jobs in my life, right? So my first job was I was doing my A-levels, and I grew up in Wood Green, and which is a fairly blank suburb of North London.
It's really is blank, isn't it?
It's quite blank. Yeah, and it's
very pale grey.
It's just a bit male. It's like it's kind of broke, but it's right. Like at the time, it was right next to Tottenham, where if there was real poverty going on, and we had ups and downs during my childhood. There were moments where we were fine, and then there were moments where my mother was literally knocking on the door of our neighbors for eggs to make us omelets because we didn't have anything, right? And then, I went to school in Crouch End and Muswell Hill, and they're very affluent areas. So anyway, I was like doing my A-levels. I was going to school at Highgate Wood in Crouch End.
And sorry, just to interject there, but going to A-levels, that's quite like a... It's quite like not everyone does A-levels,
Oh man, I gave up my A-levels halfway through. I legit gave up. I was living by myself, which in retrospect, I don't know how that came about, and it certainly wasn't the smartest idea. I was 17 or whatever.
But it's ambitious.
Yeah, it's dumb. It's what it is. And so I didn't really go to school as soon as I kind of could get away with having creative excuses as to not turn up in my classes, and I got that little ounce of freedom. I just hung out in a local guitar shop. So I was there. I hung out there every single day. It was a place not there anymore. It's a place called Rock Around the Clock. It was a very legendary guitar shop while it was open. And one day I was just hanging out there so much, they were like, "Do you want a job?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure."
Amazing.
So I was doing that, and at the time I was playing in some a crap pop punk band, which then turned into a not as crap but still crap hardcore band because we realized that nobody would take us seriously playing pop punk. And I was working in this shop, and I had no idea. My life had no direction. It was just I do these things, and I'm an idiot kid, so I'm just gonna be an idiot kid and do these things.
Very easy to plug into that mindset, isn't it? Being into this kind of music.
It feels like it is for a large part of that scene is for directionless people like I was at that point in time. The King Blues kind of existed. I was asked to join, and at that point I was also playing a band called Ramrod the Offie, which was a street punk band, which was kind of shared members with the King Blues. And we went on tour. We had a tour booked. I can't remember. Maybe it was with Baba Luck. I can't remember. And I was really panicked. I was like, wait, hang on. How do I do this? I got to go on tour and I got to have a job and I don't know what to do. I didn't know you had holiday. Yeah. I was a dumb kid. I didn't know that these things, I didn't know I had rights. So I sort of told the owner, but I explained it to her in this way where she thought I was quitting my job. So she was like, "Okay, it's time for you to go." And so that's what I did. And I went, "Oh, hang on, what am I going to do for money?" So I just kind of coasted for 2.5 years, maybe a bit longer, without a job and just kind of being in a band and sort of dodging the landlords the best I could and just being just totally just living by the absolute seat of my pants and just being I have no fucking clue how I'm surviving. Counting the literal counting change on the floor of my tiny bedroom in this house, going, "Hey, I wonder if I can afford a bagel today. Yeah, I'll have a bagel."
So wait, was rent all right? Because we all know, I pay 500, and that is the cheapest you're ever going to find.
Well, this was back when you could like rent a place in Dalston for like, a room in Dalston for like sub £300, right?
Right.
So it wasn't when it wasn't as it is now.
So if you could play 2 shows a week, 3 shows a week, open mic stuff, try and get 50 quid.
Yeah, I didn't do that. Like,
What did you do then?
I just didn't pay rent. Like literally, literally, it was that. That's what I did. For full disclosure, when we signed to Universal and we got an advance, we paid back every penny we owed to the landlords. Which I mean is maybe for a band that had a song called "Let's Hang the Landlord," maybe the most unpunk rock thing I could have possibly just said. But hey, that's the reality of life,
baby.
Yeah. And and then so kind of after that, I sort of went from like having this sort of job, going on one tour and quitting my job. We were signed to Household Name at the time, and I remember Lil turned around to me and went, "Wait, you quit your job for one tour?" And I was just like, "Yes, I don't want to talk about it anymore." So that was kind of it. And then then the King Blues signed to Universal, and we part of our advance we separated into like a monthly paycheck, and I was like, oh okay, I do this now, and that's how I get paid. And that carried through our career, through Universal to Transmission Recordings, we did the same thing. And then the King Blues obviously imploded, and I was like, oh hey, like I'm 27 and I don't know how to tie my own shoelaces, and what the fuck is a job?
Throughout all that time, obviously, you grew up a little bit. The organization of the band probably it's going to push you towards being a bit more like, I guess smarter, isn't it? Being a bit more on it. Was there a part of you that thought, well, we do have downtime from tour and from writing. We are getting this money. I'm going to actually get like another thing on the side just so I can even just get some cream, put away something.
That option, I'm going to try and say this without burying anybody. And when I talk about the King Blues, I don't want to bury anyone. I'm using the pro wrestling term of bury there, by the way. That was not an option. Like, as far as I understood it and saw it, we were 24/7, quite literally, about that band. And that was both a blessing and a curse. So there was no like little side hustles. There was no time where I could be me and go and do something else. I was continuously like defined by and constricted by that band, basically.
Right.
Because that's just how it worked. And I'm not saying that as a positive or a negative. I'm not saying that as a good or bad thing. I'm just saying it as that's what it was.
It's funny how susceptible we can be to environments, whether that be a relationship, whether that be at work, whether it be a friendship group. I mean, the latter of which is probably the most common of all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I had to really do some work. Like, again, I had some wonderful positive experiences with DIY and punk rock, and I still carry a lot of that stuff forward. But I had to drop a lot of it because I'm, me personally, I'm real susceptible to other people's opinions of me. So, and that translates to me to constantly be like, you deserve nothing, and the want for the cash and prizes, if you will, isn't something that you're allowed, and so you shouldn't do it, and you should have the least of everything. And I inherited that from like DIY punk rock, and
that's so not true,
Yeah, right. And like the thing is that's on me. Like, again, like the culture is fantastic as much as it is ultra toxic, right? Stuff can be two things, but it's on me. I interpreted it that way and I took it that way. And it took a long time for me to like kind of unpick that stuff. And in many ways, I still sort of am unpicking that stuff.
Is that something that you find a redemption of sorts in doing Teenage Sequence?
The musical freedom is something that I really am happy to have. And I guess like the lyrical freedom as well, but really it's the kind of musical freedom and just to be like kind of free of like other people's expectations. And I mean that like both like being my own band member, the only expectations that I have to like put up with are mine. And the only band member I have to argue with is me. And that's plenty. That's like way more than enough. I spend most of my time arguing with myself about stuff. But no, the freedoms that come with Teenage Sequence and also spending an awful amount of time away from making music has been a godsend, right? It's been absolutely wonderful in retrospect. After the King Blues, I started Bleach Blood, and my publishers, Notting Hill Music, put me on a retainer. So, and a big part of my like this whole story is me is like respecting money, because I had zero respect for money because I just kind of skirted through life going like, money's dumb and I don't have any, so whatever, I'll survive. I did a bunch of stuff in the interim, like I was writing for other artists. I was on a retainer from my publishers. I really took that for granted.
And how did that come about? You hear about publishers. I mean, it's come up quite a few on this podcast, but it's interesting because it seems behind the doors, you know.
Yeah, well, they signed us, three of us, out of the King Blues as individual writers. And then, Transmission Recordings, the label that the last two albums that I was involved in, was their label. And when it came to an end and I sort of sent them some demos of this dumb thing that I was doing, they were like, hey, we're really into this. So they signed it again. And then they signed me again to a publishing deal. But part of that was like to be like, okay, hey, we want you to go and do these writing camps and like write for other artists and, and see what comes of that.
How into that stuff were you?
Not not at all. At the time, I was like, again, just like kind of like bouncing around in my own life. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go and do that. I mean, I could be very chameleonic, right? So I was just like, yeah, I totally want to be a top liner and write for other people and write pop songs. But that shit is an art form. And the people that are good at it are unbelievably talented, but I can't do it. Like I'm a terrible ghostwriter. I've done some stuff with my friend's band in Denmark called Hero, and they're like the only band that I really do any writing stuff for now. And that's if Christopher, the front man, gets in touch with me and goes, hey, can you help me with the lyric? I'm like, yeah, sure. And we do it like that. But it wasn't for me. I just couldn't get my head around it.
Was that like a big thing, that you tried and it was like, actually, this isn't for me? I mean, how long were you trying it?
I did it for like the best part of like a year or two. And I spoke a big game, but I actually didn't really do much. And, it was like, that was an experience. I certainly learned a hell of a lot about how that, that commercial pop music train works. And I learned to really have a level of respect for it and understand that the writers and producers and artists involved in doing that are tremendously talented. It really helped me like understand that process, which, when you come from that like rock thing and you've got those cultural borders up of like, oh, hey, rock and pop music's not real music. I hate the term not real music. No one gets to define what isn't real music. It's a horrible saying. But I learned like tons about that. And but the main thing that I learned was it's not for me. I'm not very good at it.
You mentioned talking about like talking the big game. Was that a big part of it? Looking in retrospect,
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know,
like bigging yourself up, talking.
yeah, like because I didn't have anything else going on in life, right? So I was just like, oh, I got this thing, and I'm just gonna ram it down people's throats. You know, yeah, it's like large, largely ungrounded ego for a few years, right? That was me, and I say that because it's just the truth. And actually, like taking I took a job working for my uncle, and he had a greasy spoon cafe on Leather Lane called Chino's Cafe, and it was the food was great, but like you walked in and you were covered with like a physical layer of grease that you could run your finger through. It was horrid, right? And I worked for him for like 2 months, and that really took me down a peg or two, because he's like I love my uncle very much, but he's a real stern man, and he has no time for my nonsense, and he has no time for my rock star bullshit. It's like eggs and bacon, table 2. Why are you still standing there? And I learned a lot from that. That was actually in between. So the guitar shop that I was working in, the one that was on Bethnal Green Road, I started there. I got fired. I started working for my uncle. Then they rehired me, and then I was there for a bunch of time. Then I left, and then I came back again. Then that place closed, and then lockdown 1 happened.
Did you enjoy working the guitar shop stuff?
Yes and no. Like being in like the East London thing was really cool, because I got to meet a lot of like amazing, noteworthy musicians, right? And because of the high caliber of the stock that we had, I got to meet and got to play some of these like dream instruments. So from that perspective, it was really great. And also, you know, I got things for staff prices, so it was like
Nice.
It made, you know, I could stock up on stuff.
And you were writing, you know, you're still playing guitar.
Yeah, like Bleach Blood was kind of coming to a close around about this. I mean, like that kind of leads to the negative aspect of working. So I guess working so close to the industry that you also are a part of from a different angle, it was really hard for me to care about wanting to make records or write music or even touch a musical instrument after spending my entire day selling them to people. It was, I couldn't do it anymore. But again, everything kind of falls in place, and I didn't know that I needed a break from doing that until I took a break and walked away from it. And then it was like, you know, it was in that shop that we started selling synths, and like it was there I was like, hey, maybe I could like learn how to play synths. Like I like synthesizers. I like the sounds they make. I like the music and genres associated with that. Maybe I should learn how to play one of those. And that's really what that was one of like the sort of seeds that gave birth to Teenage Sequence.
It was a bit of a surprise. Was it a bit of a new love?
Well, a rekindled love, right? So I found like dance music, and in general, when I found music, like it was the same time when I was a kid and I started listening to my brother's records, and like waiting up for the VH1 rock show with Tommy Vance, and I was like at 11 o'clock maybe, and you know, I was a kid and 11 o'clock was super late, and like I would fall asleep waiting for it to come on the sofa, and then I'd wake up, and sometimes you'd wake up and it'd be like, oh hey, that's a Motorhead video, or there's a Ramones video, or that's the Cult. And then every now and then it'd be like New Order, Kraftwerk, and these like kind of more rock orientated dance projects and things that exist in that alternative sphere. So I kind of fell in love with dance music the same time I fell in love with music. But when I got into punk rock, again, I guess one of the more insidious sides of like genres, learning about genres, and like particularly in something as elitist as punk rock, I became very just like, oh, if it's not punk, it sucks kind of guy. Apart from like, ska, reggae, and hip hop, because they were deemed like acceptable genres to listen to if you were a punk kid of my age.
Yeah.
And in that dance music, house, techno, like trance stuff, that wasn't, as far as I could tell, involved. And this is long before I knew about like the Grebo movement, or I knew about the roots of acid house and how the rave scene came from the squat scene and all of that stuff. So like, yeah, it wasn't like a new love. It was just picking up on an old love and being like learning how to play a synthesizer for the sake of just learning how to play it, because I didn't know how they worked.
Yeah.
And instantly kind of going like, oh, hey, well, that's kind of cool. And that could be a song. And why didn't I do this? So, for like a dance music purist, Teenage Sequence is probably way too rock, right? And not dance enough. And for rock purists, Teenage Sequence is way too dance and most certainly not rock enough. Particularly in like a rock or pop sphere, everything's been done. And if you think you're doing something original, there'll be thousands of people at the same time as you doing it who've done it before you, but just not had the, not broken with it, and who will do it in the future thinking it's the most original thing in the world. So I don't worry about that. It's like, does Teenage Sequence sound like LCD Sound System? Yes, it does. Does it sound like New Order? Yeah, it does. And, etc., etc., etc. Like, I can tell you the songs that I ripped off, and whether I did it on purpose by design, or just by kind of like going, hey, that's really cool. Oh wait, that kind of sounds like that. Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm way more interested now in like honesty in music. I'm interested in hearing an artist's honesty and what that sounds like and what that looks like. And with that, I'm way more interested in exploring that in myself as an artist and being like, what does my honesty sound like? Like, what that's the important bit to me.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for being up for this chat. It's great to know. I mean, so much of those stories, I had no idea. It's one of those things that you don't really necessarily talk about a lot, is it?
Yeah. I don't think I told anybody I worked in a greasy spoon.
Really?
My wife knows, and like my uncle knows, because he was there and very frustrated with me.
What were your best kind of eggs? Your favorite kind of eggs?
Oh man,
to make or to eat?
I like to eat. That's a trick question, because all eggs is good. Either all eggs are good or you're vegan, right?
It's true. Yeah.
To cook at home, I poach eggs. At the cafe, I wasn't there long enough to be allowed to grill stuff. Like, it was a good day if I didn't burn toast.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Giles.
So there he is, Teenage Sequence, Dewan-Dean Soomary. All This Art and The City is Hungover is available now via Get Better Records in the States, and Everything Sucks Music here in the UK. See you next week. Here is Sparrer.
I've been working all day for me mate on the side, running around like a blue-ass fly. I've been working all day for me mate. Every bleeding minute I've been on the go, up and down the ladder like a fiddler's elbow. I've been working all day for me mate.
This is a Mighty Moon Media podcast.